Jimmy Kimmel just lit the fuse on live television. With a smug grin and zero shame, he dropped the nuclear question. The ugly rumor that Barron Trump wasn't really Melania's son at all, but Ivanka's. What started as late-night entertainment instantly exploded into a brutal power clash when the two women didn't flinch. Instead, they hit back hard, exposing Jimmy's cheap shot for exactly what it was: a desperate, sleazy attempt to chase ratings by dragging a child and a family through the mud. Jimmy Kimmel walked onto the studio floor just minutes before the show went live, his usual stack of note cards tucked under his arm. He gave the crew a quick nod and dropped into his chair behind the desk, flipping through the cards one last time. The audience was already clapping and cheering like they always did, but something felt off tonight. The energy in the room was a little too sharp, like everyone knew something bigger was coming. Then Melania Trump stepped out first. She moved with that quiet, ice-cold elegance that didn't need to try hard. Right behind her came Ivanka Trump. Where Melania was calm and distant, Ivanka brought fire. She smiled wider, lifted her hand to wave at the audience, and carried herself with that confident energy. Jimmy stood up from his desk with his best host smile, arms open like he was greeting old friends. "Ladies, welcome to the show. It's really great to have both of you here tonight," he said, his voice warm and smooth. Melania gave a small nod, her expression barely changing. "Thank you, Jimmy." Her voice was soft but carried weight. Ivanka sat down next to her, crossing her legs and flashing another quick smile toward the cameras. "Happy to be here," she added, sounding more open than her stepmother. The first few minutes rolled along like normal late-night TV. Jimmy asked about their recent travels, a couple of big events they'd attended, and how the family was holding up with all the craziness in the news. Melania answered politely, keeping her answers short and careful. Ivanka jumped in more, talking about work and staying busy, her tone friendly enough to keep the audience nodding along. Then Jimmy leaned forward slightly, still smiling, but everyone could feel the shift. "You know, with everything going on these days, it's nice to see family sticking together," he said casually. "Speaking of family, how's everyone doing at home? Barron must be getting so big now." The moment the name Barron left his mouth, a low ripple moved through the audience. A few people whispered to the person next to them. Melania's smile tightened just a fraction. Ivanka's eyes flicked toward Jimmy for half a second longer than necessary. The easy small talk suddenly felt like the quiet right before a storm hits. Jimmy kept that easy smile on his face like nothing was wrong. Then he leaned forward a little more in his chair, tapping the note cards on the desk once before looking straight at Melania and Ivanka. "You know, there's been a lot of talk online lately," he said, his voice calm and almost friendly, like he was just sharing gossip with friends. "Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett went pretty far the other day. She basically said there's this rumor going around that Barron Trump has two mothers, and that Ivanka might actually be his real mom, not Melania." The words dropped like a rock into still water. For a split second, nobody moved. The audience went dead quiet. A few people in the back actually gasped. Melania's polite smile froze on her face and tightened hard, her eyes turning cold. Ivanka sat up straighter in her chair, shoulders square, her whole body suddenly tense. The cameras caught every tiny shift, and the big screens around the studio made their reactions 10 times bigger. Jimmy didn't wait for them to answer. He jumped right back in, still sounding reasonable but pushing harder. "People are saying there are even DNA reports floating around the internet. Screenshots, comparisons, all that stuff. It's everywhere. So I gotta ask, how do you both respond to something like that?" The silence that followed was brutal. It felt like the entire studio had stopped breathing. No laughter, no clapping, just the low hum of the lights and the faint sound of someone shifting uncomfortably in their seat. Melania's jaw clenched for half a second before she forced her expression back into that calm mask. Ivanka's eyes locked onto Jimmy like lasers, her hands resting perfectly still on her lap, but her knuckles were turning white. Then Melania leaned slowly toward the microphone, her voice low and ice-cold. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Every word cut through the air like a sharp knife. "My husband warned you last time about asking cheap questions. Have you forgotten?" The way she said it, Slow, steady, and completely controlled, made it hit even harder. It wasn't a shout, it was worse. It felt like a warning from someone who didn't need to raise her voice to make you feel small. A few people in the audience let out nervous little cheers, like they weren't sure if they should clap or hide. Most just sat frozen, eyes wide, phones halfway up like they wanted to record but were scared to move. Jimmy blinked once, his smile cracking just a bit at the edges. He tried to laugh it off lightly, but the sound came out thin. Whoa, okay, I'm just asking what a lot of people are already talking about online. It's not like I made it up. Melania sat back without saying another word, her eyes never leaving Jimmy's face. Ivanka stayed perfectly still beside her, but the energy coming off both women had completely changed the room. Then Ivanka leaned forward in her chair, eyes locked straight on Jimmy like she was staring through him. The polite mask was gone. Her voice came out sharp and clear, cutting across the studio without raising an inch. "We are not commenting on this, Jimmy. You don't get to say whatever you want on live television. I could have you thrown in jail just for asking that question." The words landed hard. A wave of shocked murmurs swept through the audience. Some people gasped out loud. Others sat completely still, mouths half open. Jimmy's easy host smile faltered for a second. He let out a short, awkward laugh, trying to play it cool, but his eyes showed he knew things had just gotten real. He shifted in his seat and slammed his stack of note cards down on the desk with a loud smack. The sound echoed through the studio. "One child, two mothers," he said, his voice rising with fake confidence. "The whole country is waiting for an answer. You can't just shut it down like that." Before either woman could respond, Jimmy nodded toward the control booth. The big screens behind them lit up with the first piece of evidence he had prepared. Old timeline photos appeared. Baby Baron in the hospital, side by side with Melania's and Ivanka's public schedules from that exact week. Jimmy pointed at the screen. "Look at this. People have been connecting the dots for months. Dates don't line up perfectly. You can see why they're asking questions." The audience leaned in even more. Phones started coming up. Whispers turned into louder buzzing. Ivanka's face stayed stone cold, but her posture stiffened. Melania didn't even glance at the screen. She kept her eyes fixed on Jimmy, calm on the outside, but with a dangerous edge underneath. Then Melania spoke. Her voice was quiet, almost gentle, but every word cut like a blade. She didn't rush. She didn't yell. She just told a small private moment from years ago. "I remember the night Baron was born," she said slowly. "I was exhausted, scared, and completely alone with that tiny baby in my arms. I whispered to him that I would always protect him, no matter what the world threw at us. That feeling, that bond only a mother who carried him and gave birth to him can understand. No rumor, no screenshot, no timeline can take that away." She paused for half a second, then looked Jimmy dead in the eyes and hit him with a counter. "Do you have children, Jimmy? Do you know what it feels like to have your most private moments dragged out in public for entertainment?" The studio went quiet again. A few people in the front row actually nodded. Someone in the back let out a low whistle. Jimmy opened his mouth, then closed it. His usual quick comeback didn't come as fast this time. He tried to smile, but it looked forced. Jimmy wasn't backing down. Even after Melania's sharp question, he straightened up in his chair and gave a tight smile. "Look, I'm not trying to hurt anyone," he said. "But when a former staff member who worked inside your household breaks their NDA and talks, people listen." He nodded toward the control room again. The giant screens behind the guests lit up with a big block of text, a supposed quote from an ex-household employee. Jimmy read it out loud, his voice loud and clear so the whole studio could hear every word. The timeline never added up. Melania was traveling constantly that month. We all noticed how close Ivanka was to the baby. She acted more like the real mom than anyone wanted to admit. The audience exploded into loud murmurs. Some people shouted, "Oh my God!" Others booed. Phones shot up everywhere as people tried to record the quote on the screen. Jimmy leaned back, looking satisfied for the first time in minutes. "That's not me saying it. That's someone who was there." Ivanka had heard enough. She pushed her chair back and stood up fast, her face hard with anger. The studio lights caught the sharp movement as she pulled her phone out of her pocket. Without hesitation, she dialed a number and hit speakerphone right there on live TV. The ringing echoed through the studio speakers. The call connected. A serious male voice answered on the other end. "This is Ivanka Trump," she said, her voice strong and steady, no shaking at all. "I need an arrest warrant prepared immediately for defamation and harassment against Jimmy Kimmel. Live on air right now. Yes, you heard me correctly. Do it tonight." The entire audience lost it. Shouts and gasps filled the room. Some people jumped to their feet. Others yelled, "What the hell?" while a few actually cheered like they were watching a fight. The noise turned into total chaos for a few seconds. Jimmy's face went pale. He sat frozen behind his desk, mouth slightly open, watching Ivanka stand there like she owned the whole building. Melania stayed seated, but she wasn't silent anymore. She calmly took out her own phone, tapped the screen a couple of times, and nodded to the control booth. A new image appeared on the big screens, a clear photo of an old handwritten letter. The handwriting was neat and personal. Melania's voice stayed quiet and controlled, but it carried through the noisy studio like a hammer. "This is a letter I wrote to Baron when he was 2 years old," she said. "I kept it private for years. Only a real mother would write something like this." She paused, letting the audience read the emotional words on the screen. "Here's the proof only his birth mother could have. Do you want real DNA next, Jimmy?" Her voice never rose, but the whole studio seemed to shake with the weight of it. The audience went from loud chaos to stunned silence in seconds. Jimmy stared at the letter on the screen, then back at Melania. His usual quick jokes were gone. For the first time all night he looked truly rattled. The evidence battle had just turned into an all-out war, and the two women had fired back harder than anyone expected. The tension was so thick it felt like the air itself was pressing down on everyone. Ivanka still stood with her phone in hand, daring anyone to test her again. Melania sat perfectly still beside her, eyes locked on Jimmy. Jimmy's face had gone from pale to flushed. Sweat was starting to show on his forehead under the hot studio lights. He knew he was losing control, but he couldn't stop himself. He slammed his hand down on the desk for the second time that night, a loud, sharp crack that made half the audience jump. "What about all the rumors about your special relationship with your father, Ivanka?" he blurted out, his voice cracking with panic and desperation. "What are you two really hiding? The country deserves the truth." The words hung in the air like poison. Gasps and angry shouts erupted from the crowd. Some people booed loudly. Others looked shocked that he had gone there. Jimmy gripped the edge of his desk, breathing hard, eyes wild as he stared at the two women. Ivanka didn't sit back down. She stepped forward, walking right to the edge of the stage, her heels clicking sharply on the floor. Her eyes were blazing with pure fury. The calm, polished image was completely gone. "You just crossed the final line, Jimmy," she said, her voice low but burning with intensity. She raised her phone again, turned on the speaker, and spoke loud enough for every microphone in the studio to pick it up clearly. "This is Ivanka Trump again. Send the arrest warrant for Jimmy Kimmel tonight. Defamation, harassment, and now crossing into family slander. I want it processed immediately. Live on air, right now." The studio exploded into total chaos. People were yelling, some standing up, others screaming at the stage. The noise was deafening. Cameras shook as the crew tried to keep filming. Jimmy looked like he had been punched in the gut. His mouth opened, but no words came out at first. Melania rose slowly from her chair and stepped beside Ivanka. She didn't say anything. She simply placed her hand calmly on Ivanka's shoulder, a quiet, united front that felt colder and more powerful than any shout. The simple gesture silenced the entire studio in seconds. The shouting died down into an eerie, heavy quiet. Everyone could feel the raw power in that one small moment of solidarity between the two women. Jimmy swallowed hard, trying one last desperate move to save the segment. His voice came out shaky as he leaned toward the microphone. "If there's really nothing to hide, then why won't you just answer the question simply?" Melania looked straight at him, her expression completely calm, her voice steady and ice-cold. She didn't raise it. She didn't need to. One short sentence sliced through the tension like a knife. "Because you don't deserve to know. The studio erupted. Half the audience burst into loud, thunderous applause. The other half exploded with angry shouts and boos. The mix of clapping, yelling, and chaos created a wall of noise that shook the entire set. Jimmy sat there stunned, his usual quick wit completely gone. He looked small behind his big desk for the first time all night. Melania and Ivanka didn't say another word. They turned together and walked off the stage side by side, shoulders back, heads high, moving with a kind of quiet pride that made the whole studio feel smaller. Their steps were perfectly in sync, heels clicking sharply against the floor as the bright lights followed them. No waves, no goodbyes, no final glance at Jimmy. They simply left, powerful and united, like the conversation was beneath them now. Jimmy sat frozen behind his desk, mouth slightly open, staring at the empty space where they had been. His usual cocky energy was completely gone. The audience watched in stunned silence as the two women disappeared behind the side doors. The stage light suddenly felt too bright, too harsh on Jimmy's pale face. He tried to pull himself together. Clearing his throat, he turned toward the camera with a weak smile and forced a laugh that sounded completely fake. "Well, folks, I think we just witnessed history tonight," he said, his voice shaky. "That was something else." Before he could say anything more, a woman in the middle of the audience suddenly stood up. She looked to be in her late 40s, dressed simply, and her voice rang out loud and clear across the studio. "They're right," she shouted, pointing toward the exit where Melania and Ivanka had just left. "Don't touch their family. They told the truth. Stay out of their business." The studio erupted into total chaos one last time. Half the crowd cheered and clapped loudly for the woman. The other half booed and yelled back at her. People stood up, arguing with each other across the rows. Security started moving toward the woman as the noise grew louder and messier. Jimmy's head snapped toward the disruption, his eyes wide with panic. He raised his hands like he was trying to calm everyone down, but it was useless. The final spark had turned the whole place into pure bedlam. Then Jimmy's phone on the desk lit up with a message from the producer. The words flashed across the big monitor behind him for everyone to see. "Legal team calling urgently. They are preparing to sue. Get off air. Now." Jimmy stared at the message, his face turning ghostly white. All the color drained from his cheeks. He slowly sank back into his chair, looking completely defeated. The fast-talking late-night host who loved pushing buttons had finally pushed too far, and the consequences were hitting him in real time. The camera slowly zoomed out, pulling back from Jimmy's stunned face to show the entire studio. The audience sat in a strange, heavy silence now, some still whispering, others just staring at the empty stage. The wild energy from moments ago had settled into something deeper: shock, disbelief, and the realization that they had just watched a normal talk show turn into a raw, unforgettable battle of power and boundaries. One child, two mothers, one question too far, and a night that no one in that studio, or watching at home, would ever forget.